Sensors and actuators are the way that Internet of Things devices learn from the world and interact with the world. So sensors are how they interpret what the world is doing. So we have sensors ourselves. We have ears for hearing, we have eyes for seeing light and distance, we have hands and skin for feeling how cold or warm things are, but a computer doesn't have all those inputs. And so that's why it needs a sensor to turn those real world inputs into something it understands. So the real world is analog. We don't have zeros and ones making up the temperature. It really is just a physical property of the world. So what a sensor does is it turns that very analog physical property into something that the computer understands. And it needs to convert that analog input to a digital input for that to happen. Sometimes a sensor will do that within the little module you buy. So if you buy a digital sensor, that's what's happening. A digital sensor is reading the analog world, but it's converting that on the little sensor that you buy into digital before it even gets into the wires. Hey, where'd this come from? Oh, this is my sensor and board for my proof of concept, and this is a temperature and humidity sensor. And I'm honestly not even sure if it's digital. I think it is. It's a DHT11. I'm pretty sure that the D stands for digital and the HT stands for humidity and temperature. But anyway, so this sensor is used for my proof of concept, but I want to be able to put the sensor in my Bronco, and this, try as I might, just doesn't fit in there, and it's not waterproof anyway, so sticking in coolant probably wouldn't be a good idea. So this is what happens when anybody tries to go from a proof of concept, where you're just proving that the idea will work, to the real world. I've been looking into how I'm going to get a sensor into this truck and read from it, and I found out a few things. So I've got a 3/8 inch NPT threaded hole where my original sensor goes. NPT is a national pipe thread, and that kind of indicates the pitch of those threads, so that you're not going to try to screw it in there and it gets stuck or anything like that. And it also only has a certain depth. The original sensor is really short, so finding a sensor that's going to be that short, I think, is going to be pretty difficult. And I'm not very great at electrical stuff, so I want to make it as easy on myself as possible. Ideally, I'd find a sensor that has analog to digital conversion on board, and that would allow me to not have to worry about changing all that analog stuff in the real world into zeros and ones that the computer understands. It would just happen on the sensor itself. I don't think I'm going to find that, though, because when that happens, the output sometimes is not the same for every sensor. So there's proprietary digital sensors out there that work on old trucks like this, and they go to a digital dash. However, they're meant to be interpreted by a specific, VDO gauge, that sort of thing. So it's a certain company makes a certain gauge, and they make a sensor that pairs with it, and they work together well. If I got that sensor, I'd have to figure out what they're doing, what those zeros and ones mean, and that might be pretty difficult. So I think the best route for me is going to be finding an analog sensor, which every sensor is analog at the very beginning, but an analog sensor indicates that there's no conversion to digital on the sensor itself. So I need to find an analog sensor that will fit in that 3/8 inch threaded hole and be waterproof and work within the temperature range that I'm looking for, which is about 0 degrees to Fahrenheit to 300 degrees Fahrenheit, somewhere in there. And there's many different kinds of analog sensors just to measure temperature. There's thermistors and thermocouples, and they all have different temperature ranges, and even within those there's different types of thermocouples like K and J, and they have different standards and made with different metals. It's a crazy world out there in the sensor world. So anyway, I need to sift through all that and find a sensor that will work in that threaded hole, not be too long, and I need to find some documentation on how to take that sensor's analog input, what it means, and turn it into a digital 0 and 1, basically, whether that happens inside of the Raspberry Pi or on a chip itself, which is called an analog to digital chip. It's called an ADC. And that'll just do the conversion on the chip itself. I don't have to do any math or anything like that. But the key is, for that to happen, I need to pair it with a sensor that it knows, because there's a whole thing in there about algorithms and tables and how accurate the sensors are at the lowest end of the range and how accurate they are at the top end of the range. The point being that the transition from a prototype to the real world isn't always an easy one. So that's where a lot of projects fail. From proof of concept, everybody's happy, it reads from this sensor, and they think, okay, great, we're going to put it in the real world, and that's where that transition fails. And it could be for many reasons. For me, this sensor thing's pretty difficult, but for other people it could be getting the code of the device, getting the device to be manufactured in a feasible way that's inexpensive, or it could be distributing code to thousands of devices, or monitoring them, or hosting a cloud solution that doesn't fall over. All of these things are very difficult beyond the single device that sits on a desk. So wish me luck on my journey to find the right sensor for my truck, and when I find that sensor, I'll keep you updated. So stay tuned.